faithfully sharing insights and exploring great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today, I'll be discussing the book, The French Revolution. The author is William Doyle, a renowned historian who's studied this period for decades. He gained fame in 1980 with the origins of the French Revolution, and in 1989, for its 200th anniversary, Oxford University invited him to write this French Revolution as part of their very short introductions series. This book offers a concise overview of the French Revolution's history. The French Revolution, erupting in 1789, stands as one of the most dramatic events in modern political history. But, the revolution's process is just too complex. With all the later recollections, debates, and reinterpretations, this whole event becomes a real maze. People trying to learn about the French Revolution often find themselves totally lost. But Doyle, the author, cuts through the clutter with clear, concise language. Before the revolution erupted, France's severe financial crisis sparked social tensions under the old system, fueling the revolutionary movement. As the revolution progressed, violence and terror escalated, pushing it out of control, and even the revolutionaries ended up victims. Now, let's dive into the book and start with the spark of the revolution, the financial crisis. This was caused by France's aggressive militarism in the 18th century. Throughout the 18th century, France fought three major wars. The first war was under Louis XIV, the Sun King. He battled Britain for overseas colonies in a conflict lasting over a decade. At its peak, France faced an alliance of Britain, the Netherlands, and the Holy Roman Empire alone. The second war was under Louis XV, with France teaming up with Austria and Spain against Britain and Prussia. This conflict, known as the 7 Years' War, ended in a crushing defeat for France, costing its vast colonial territories. So, the Third War occurred under Louis XVI. In 1776, when the American Revolution began, France, a longtime rival of Britain, quickly sided with the Americans. Under French military pressure, British forces in North America were forced to surrender. So, some joke that it was the French who really won the American Revolution. Even though they won, the French didn't gain much from it. Years of warfare drained France of enormous financial and material resources. Louis XVI's predecessors, Louis XIV and Louis XV, were notoriously extravagant. Just the cost of maintaining their mistresses was a bottomless pit. By the time Louis XVI ascended the throne, the treasury was not only empty, but also deeply in debt. Louis XVI had hoped that by helping America win the Revolutionary War, the Americans would ally with him and boost trade, thus offsetting some losses. However, repaying favors isn't exactly the American style. After independence, America's largest trading partner remained Britain, and in international affairs, they didn't help the French. In short, France's investment yielded little return. With America unreliable and the financial crisis urgent, Louis XVI had to turn to domestic reforms. This reform, to put it bluntly, meant raising taxes on the people. If you collect more taxes, won't the financial crisis be solved? Sounds great in theory, but implementing it faced heavy resistance. Louis XVI went through 3 finance ministers in a row and still couldn't get it done. So why was it so difficult? The problem lies in France's social structure. At that time, France's population was about 25 million, divided into 3 estates. The first estate was the clergy, around 120,000 people. The second estate was the nobility, around 300,000. The rest were collectively called the third estate, including the bourgeoisie, peasants, and urban commoners. In terms of numbers, the first and second estates combined made up less than 2% of the total population. Yet they held high social status and vast resources, forming the privileged class. For example, the clergy were France's largest landowners, with substantial income from estates. They also collected the tithe, taking 1/10 of peasants' income. The nobility were also major landowners, owning a quarter of the nation's land, and they monopolized positions like officials, ministers, judges, advisors, all reserved for nobles. More importantly, the privileged classes had tax exemptions. No matter how much the state taxed, it couldn't touch them. So, where did the taxes to sustain the state finances come from? Only from the Third Estate. In other words, for over a century, from Louis XIV to Louis XVI, the French kings could live lavishly and wage frequent wars, thanks to the taxes paid by the Third Estate and the government bonds they bought. However, politically, the Third Estate had little voice and was only exploited by the privileged classes, creating massive inequality. The Third Estate paid the most taxes, yet had the lowest social status, while the tax-exempt clergy and nobles looked down on them from above. Oh, the Third Estate was already discontented, and Louis XVI realized it too. So this time, he stopped asking the Third Estate for money and planned to make the privileged classes pay up. The method was simple: order them to pay taxes too, called tax equality. Well, this infuriated the privileged classes. They used the high court controlled by nobles to oppose the king. Here, I should clarify, judges in France could be bought at the time. Just pay enough to become a judge and gain noble status. The king meant to increase revenue, but he ended up digging his own grave. By law, the king's decrees had to be registered by the high court to take effect, giving nobles a chance to fight him. So when Louis XVI demanded taxes from the privileged classes, this happened. How could reforms move forward? But stalling wouldn't solve anything. By 1788, national finances were near bankruptcy. Louis XVI was desperately anxious, almost begging the privileged classes to agree to taxes. But the privileged classes were still unwilling. They proposed that since taxes were needed, all three estates discuss how much each should pay. The privileged classes' cunning plan was that if the Third Estate also refused taxes, the king would be powerless. And if the Third Estate agreed, they'd bear the brunt, so the privileged classes used them as a scapegoat. Interestingly, Louis XVI agreed to convene the Estates General in 1789. He had his own scheme, hoping to use the Third Estate's power to force the privileged classes to pay taxes. As a result, both the king's and the privileged classes' plans backfired. They found they couldn't control it. The Third Estate. On May 5th, 1789, the Estates General convened at the Palace of Versailles, 15 kilometers from Paris, which was also the king's residence. Traditionally, the three estates discussed issues separately, and any resolution required approval from two estates. Even if passed, the clergy and nobles, both privileged classes, were definitely in cahoots. The voting results clearly disadvantaged the Third Estate, so they proposed joint discussions and voting by head count. Only this way could the populist Third Estate prevail, but the privileged classes outright refused. Thus, the meeting deadlocked for 6 long weeks. During this period, finances deteriorated sharply, triggering a nationwide economic crisis and signs of social order collapse. The Third Estate couldn't wait any longer and announced unilateral proceedings without the First and Second Estates. Now, the privileged classes panicked. Fearing the Third Estate's unleashed power and their own inability to control it, they humbly joined them, forming the National Assembly. And on June 17th, the National Assembly issued a decree canceling all taxes nationwide, pending review and reauthorization. Doyle notes this move was profoundly significant. Previously, taxation was the king's right. Now the National Assembly seized this power, stripping the king of his authority. From this moment, the French Revolution began. Powerless Louis XVI summoned troops to suppress the assembly. When news reached Paris, it sparked unrest. On July 14th, Parisians gathered and stormed the Bastille. Doyle believes this act held greater symbolic than practical meaning. Since taking power, Louis XVI had pursued tolerance, releasing political prisoners from the Bastille. When stormed, it held only 7 prisoners but stood as a symbol of absolute monarchy. Destroying the Bastille meant the old regime was utterly rejected by the people. Louis XVI was effectively overthrown, no longer controlling his own fate. For the National Assembly, with the old regime gone, they had to shoulder rebuilding the nation. They renamed themselves the Constituent Assembly, meaning they'd draft a constitution and rebuild social order. Their achievement was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, promulgated August 26, 1789. The Declaration proclaimed natural rights, equality before the law, and protection of property and security from unlawful harm. People possess freedom of thought, speech, and association. Government power derives from the people and is subject to their oversight. It can be said modern political principles originate from this declaration. Today, over 200 nations have constitutions influenced to varying degrees by this declaration. Oh, its significance can't be overstated. While drafting the declaration, the Constituent Assembly implemented reforms. The church tithe was abolished, church lands confiscated, noble titles abolished, and nobles barred from monopolizing official posts. So, moreover, like everyone else, clergy and nobles had to pay taxes, meaning the privileged class was wiped out. What the king failed to do, the Third Estate pulled off easily. Now, let's recap briefly. From convening the Estates General in May 1789 to issuing the Declaration of Rights in August, in just 3 months, the king lost power, the Third Estate took control, the old regime crumbled, the privileged class vanished, and ideals of liberty and equality took root, all seemingly heading in a positive direction. But who could have guessed that afterward France plunged into endless chaos, with violence and terror peaking in 1793, countless heads falling? Why did things escalate so extremely? Doyle believes it was caused by a chain of events. First was forcing clergy to swear an oath. In July 1790, the Constituent Assembly passed the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, demanding all clergy swear loyalty to the nation, not the Pope. This seems normal today, but back then, most clergy found it unacceptable. Refusers were labeled traitors and indeed joined others, discontent with the revolution, to oppose it. These became the Royalists. To this, revolutionaries reacted by claiming enemies were secretly conspiring to overthrow the revolution. In response, revolutionaries advocated using violence and terror to suppress counter-revolutionaries. Thus, France split into revolutionaries and royalists, their struggle intensifying. Then, at this critical moment, another incident fueled the fire. Louis XVI's escape. After the revolution erupted, Louis XVI was kept under house arrest in Paris. As the situation worsened, he grew increasingly worried about his safety. On the night of June 20th, 1891, Louis XVI disguised himself as a commoner and finally fled with his family by carriage. But soon, they were caught. Revolutionaries believed Louis XVI was heading abroad to seek reinforcements to crush the revolution. The French people were enraged. Many accused Louis XVI of conspiring with foreign powers, though it was originally just a rumor with no evidence. But as luck would have it, at this moment, an Austro-Prussian coalition invaded France, solidifying Louis XVI's guilt. On September 20th, 1992, French forces repelled the invasion at Valmy in northern France. 2 days later, Paris's National Convention abolished the monarchy and proclaimed the French Republic. The First French Republic. Now, radicals like Danton and Robespierre's Jacobins demanded Louis XVI's execution. They argued this would deter royalists and prevent the king from secretly aiding monarchies. After fierce debate, the Jacobins prevailed. On January 21st, 1893, Louis XVI was guillotined. marking the revolution's radical turn. If even the monarchy's highest symbol could die, anyone opposing or merely wavering could be eliminated. Jacobins like Marat even called for mass executions, splitting the revolutionary camp. Moderate revolutionaries, the Girondins, couldn't agree. The Girondins sought better ways to stabilize society, not just purges through violence. So the Jacobins branded them counter-revolutionaries, and Danton Robespierre ruthlessly guillotined their leaders. Thus, Jacobins seized power and France entered the Jacobin dictatorship era. From the start, Jacobins faced threats within and without. Royalists revolted in western France's Vendée region. Externally, Britain, Holland, and Spain joined Austria or Prussia, forming the first coalition to crush the revolutionary government. In response, starting August 1793, France took two measures. First, conscripting young men nationwide. By late 1793, invaders were repelled, even counterattacked. Second, under Robespierre, the revolution entered the reign of terror. Now paranoid, he saw enemies everywhere and demanded ruthless suppression. A Paris Revolutionary Tribunal under his control sentenced tens of thousands to death, many accused merely of potentially becoming counter-revolutionaries. Statistics show 16,000 were executed during the terror, with total unnatural deaths reaching 150,000, including combat and reprisals. Facing this, Danton, another Jacobin leader, believed terror must stop and called for leniency. Yet Danton too was sent to the guillotine by Robespierre. At this point, even revolutionaries feared daily who'd be next for the guillotine. Finally, on July 27, 1994, Robespierre's opponents united to arrest him. He was executed the next day. In the French Republican calendar, July was called Thermidor, so this became the Thermidorian reaction. The Thermidorian reaction ended the revolution's most terrifying phase, but order remained elusive. In fact, leaderless revolutionaries soon descended into chaos. By summer 1895, royalists staged open rebellion in Paris to restore monarchy. Amid crisis, one man suppressed the revolt, saving the Republic. He was Napoleon. Crushing royalists earned Napoleon immense prestige. He then led military campaigns across Europe, defeating the Republic's foes, becoming France's national hero. In November 1799, he launched the coup of 18 Brumaire, seizing revolutionary power. In 1804, Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French. At this point, the French Revolution can be said to have concluded. So, what legacy did the French Revolution leave? First, it established popular sovereignty. The revolution overthrew monarchy, declaring government power derives from the people. It challenged Europe's old regimes through continent-wide wars. Second, it created fundamental modern political concepts. For example, during assemblies, reformers sat left of the chair, conservatives right. Thus, reformers became the left, conservatives the right. This classification endures today. Finally, the revolution transformed Europe's military conscription systems. France established a standing army, becoming the origin of modern military forces. Other nations followed suit, causing a quantum leap in Europe's military capabilities. But the French Revolution had controversies too. It overthrew monarchy only to establish Napoleon's empire. It denounced the old regime's brutality, yet the revolutionary terror caused tens of thousands of deaths, and Napoleon's wars claimed over 5 million European lives. Thus, Doyle argues, the French Revolution is a legacy with limitations. All right, that concludes the French Revolution. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.